we have uncovered a remarkable planet, a world of extreme weather, alien landscapes, and bizarre phenomena. It's the most complex system we know of in the universe. That planet is Earth, and we are only beginning to unlock its secrets. The blue planet is a haven for life, but also a danger zone for the unwary. Constant interplay of land and water creates secret hazards ready to kill. Quicksand, trapping its victims without warning. Whirlpools, dragging victims into their death grip.
Like hung over the back of the boat.
Face down into the middle of the whirlpool.
And rip currents, silent killers, lurking in plain sight.
I finally had this realization that I'm not going to make it. This is how I'm going to die.
How does the peaceful planet challenge the living? Why does it threaten life with its lethal death traps? A mystery envelops planet Earth. On its surface, dry land and water face each other on the front lines of an epic clash. But the front lines in any battle are the most treacherous. Here, special dangers hide, appearing only when the planet's liquid and solid natures collide. Humans fear these bizarre death traps, but science enables us to unlock their secrets.
I think that my knowledge of quicksand comes from Indiana Jones, and not much else outside of that. I never really thought about it.
Movies have always shown quicksand victims sinking until they slowly disappear. Reality is as frightening as fiction. Wherever sands, clays, and waters mix, quicksand may form to grab and hold its victims tight.
I was stuck. I wasn't moving anywhere.
Robbie Taysar teaches wilderness skills. In 2011, hiking along the Dirty Devil River in Utah, he was so firmly trapped in quicksand, his life was in danger.
I was stuck from 12:45 in the afternoon till about 2:30 in the morning, so about 13 hours.
What's the secret behind quicksand's holding power? Quicksand can capture humans or animals anywhere it occurs.
All right, let's pull her out, nice and slow.
It is a stealthy and unpredictable phenomenon, appearing near lakes, seashores, and rivers. But thousands of people walk along shorelines and riverbanks every day without trouble. So what's the reason that only some wet sand becomes quicksand? There are two ingredients. First, the sand must be saturated, half sand, half water. Second is something to set the mixture into motion.
Well, I'm very familiar with the phenomenon called quicksand, having been stuck in it myself in Alaska. What was happening was that water was moving out underneath the glacier as groundwater, and it was moving up through the sand, and it was keeping the sand suspended. And I stepped on this very flat sand surface, and I immediately began to sink.
Groundwater, actively flowing, is one source of the critical motion that turns sand and water into quicksand. The water, moving through individual grains of sand, suspends them, almost as if floating. Solid behaves like liquid. When someone steps on top, he sinks in.
It's a very scary experience, actually.
The other way motion turns wet sand into quicksand is from vibrations. For instance, vibrations that struggling victims make.
As I am struggling, I'm starting to push the sand grains apart. I'm actually moving the water, and the water is separating those sand grains. So instead of being nice and locked together, those sand grains are loose and moving with the water. So it's basically like I'm standing in a fluid, and I'm sinking deeper.
At University of Wisconsin-Stout in Menominee, Wisconsin, a place called the Dirt Lab is devoted to solving the puzzles of quicksand.
Let's look at regular sand. If I take this weight and set it on top, regular sand will support the weight. Now, if we look at quicksand, and I place this weight on top of it, we would expect it to sink. But if I just set the weight on top, it stays up. But here's a secret. If I just start to shake things around a little bit, then the weight will start to sink into the quicksand.
If quicksand remained fluid, escape might be easier, but this material is bizarre. As vibrations continue, liquid turns back into solid.
A person trapped in quicksand is going to mix the sand and water around. And as that happens, those sand grains then are going to settle and compact around their body lower down.
This is the secret to quicksand's holding power. It shows up when a quicksand mixture in the lab is shaken to simulate vibrations from a struggling victim. The liquid migrates to the top, and the solid sand compacts below.
Those sand grains then start locking together. The person might as well be trapped in cement at that point because the sand grains are so well locked in.
This was the hidden force that snared hiker Robbie Taysar and held onto him for 13 hours.
I don't think I've tried so hard to do anything before. It was basically, like concrete.
Unless you've actually had part of your body stuck in quicksand, you never really understand how tight of a grip it has on you. Check this out.
But just how strong is quicksand's grip? You would think it wouldn't take much force to remove something as lightweight as a PVC pipe.
I filled it with water so that it's about the same density as a human's leg. I'm going to put it in quicksand here, and I'm going to find out how much force it takes to pull it out. Right now, there is almost 158 pounds of force on this rope, and the quicksand is holding the legs so tightly, the entire bucket is lifted off the floor.
The force is about twice the pulling strength of a typical human male.
This shows just how strong quicksand is and how tightly it would hold you if you were to sink in.
But what happens as a victim sinks deeper? What happens if there's no one around to help? Scientists have discovered a key to surviving quicksand. A critical part of the puzzle that, until recently, has been secret. The combination of water with the tiniest particles of land results in the earthly death trap posed by quicksand. Getting stuck in it is like a bad dream.
I had no leverage, so there's nothing to push off of.
November 23rd, 2011. wilderness hiker Robbie Taysar has been stuck in quicksand for 13 hours. His friends activate a GPS distress beacon to summon a rescue helicopter.
The helicopter came through the canyon, and it was about the most excited I've ever been. I just yelled.
The chopper hovers above and actually tries to pull Robbie straight out.
I held on to the skid as hard as I could.
It doesn't work.
I felt like I was holding the helicopter down. I think the pilot called into the air medic on land and said, you know, if I do this anymore, I'm going to rip this kid in half.
As time passes, the greatest danger for Robbie Taysar, or any victim caught in quicksand, is death by exposure. Near rising water, drowning. In the desert, thirst. In frigid temperatures, death from hypothermia. But could he have been completely sucked under? Recent research has uncovered a secret. Despite what the movies show us, it is actually impossible for a person to sink completely in quicksand.
Despite what it looks like, I'm actually okay. The bulk density of the quicksand is about twice the density of my body. So if I keep struggling, eventually I would sink down to about my belly button. But then, basically, I would float.
But how do you escape? What's the secret to getting out alive?
What you gotta do is start to wiggle yourself. Not too much, but you gotta start shaking your leg a little bit and pulling gently.
Gentle motions allow water to slowly fill in between the tightly locked sand and the victim's legs, breaking the suction holding him down.
Yep, there it goes. And eventually, you have a leg free. And then do the same thing with the other leg. And there you go.
The process will go faster when a water wand is used to pump water down next to the victim's legs.
So we're going to fill the area with water right in front of his legs, and we're going to release the pressure.
Robbie Taysar's rescuers resorted to a more basic technique.
The search and rescue guys, basically with shovels in their hands, dug around my heels and my feet to loosen the quicksand, and they were able to pull me out.
The plight of a struggling quicksand victim has its counterpart on a mega scale in earthquakes that strike in coastal zones, where soil is often saturated with water. The quake's vibrations destabilize the ground. Solid earth becomes liquid. Buildings topple. It's called soil liquefaction, and it's one of the most devastating results of big earthquakes.
Liquefaction is a type of quicksand behavior, because during an earthquake, the energy wave sent out by the earthquake itself starts to move the ground.
October 17th, 1989. The Loma Prieta earthquake liquefies parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. Buildings fail as the soil collapses under them.
There's buildings there where the second floor windows are now on ground level. Very classic illustration of a building which is sinking down through quicksand produced in an earthquake.
The greatest danger is to buildings on waterside landfill. Marina del Rey in Los Angeles, most of the shoreline around San Francisco Bay, and earthquake-prone areas in Japan. It takes the quicksand phenomenon to its most extreme, a death trap capable of massive destruction. Quicksand is generated by water on land. But in other death traps, water itself is the killer. One of the strangest comes from powerful tides hitting the coast, creating whirlpools that can drag in divers, swimmers, even entire boats. The inhabitants of planet Earth have always had much to fear when the seas turn violent. Ancient legends describe a bizarre oceanic death trap, the giant whirlpool, a swirling vortex of water with the power to swallow ships whole. Can these mariners' tales be true? Do such perils really exist? Some answers might be found at the Old Sow whirlpool in coastal waters between Maine and Canada.
The whirlpool just sucked the back end of the boat in. The engine's down in the hole. We're at an angle about like this and going around and around.
In 2011, Ruth and Dave Souza were with family in their 20-foot boat. After a close look at the big swirl, it was time to leave.
I tried to start the engine, and the boat stalled. It was just frozen up. And I said, oh my God, did I blow my engine?
Old Sow has a history of sinking boats, especially when they lacked powerful motors to help them escape. In the 19th century, it was a known killer.
As early as 1817, there are recordings of boaters going down in the waters here around Old Sow, and during that year, there were 3 drownings.
Maine resident Bob Godfrey joins coastal geologist Alan Gans to see how Old Sow compares to legend. They head to the right spot, north of Eastport, Maine, just off the tip of Canada's Deer Island. The whirlpool appears only when strong tides move in and out.
Wow, lots of whirlpools. Whirlpools are often thought of as one of the big maritime problems that we have in the world for disasters.
Old Sow is one of a handful of places on Earth where tides squeeze through narrow straits in the coastline to create frightening, fast currents and whirlpools.
On average, the amount of water coming into the bay where Old Sow resides is around 70 billion cubic feet.
Equivalent to the amount of water used by New York City in a year and a half. Old Sow and others like it are called tidal whirlpools. They also occur in Japan, Scotland, and Norway. The Norwegian Saltstraumen is the most powerful, with tidal currents up to 25 miles per hour.
To put 25 miles an hour into perspective, the Colorado River, as it flows through the Grand Canyon, over its rapids and around its tight bends, only flows at an average of 4 miles an hour.
A whirlpool like Old Sow is not just a single big swirl of water. It is actually a large zone of chaotic turbulence. Seabirds love it for the fish it stirs up to the surface. Small swirls in the turbulence are called piglets at Old Sow. But the gigantic whirlpool of myth appears to be just that, a myth.
Whirlpools in nature are often very small. They don't often get to the scales of what we're talking about in legends. They're not big enough to pull ships down.
What they do have is strong circulation, and they can sink a boat by swamping it. When a large whirlpool forms in the turbulence of Old Sow, it may be 20 to 30 feet wide, with a central hole that is 4 feet deep, shaped like a giant saucer. The notion of ocean whirlpools sucking ships down may come from the swirling resemblance to water flowing down a drain.
The difference between them, despite the fact that they look similar, is that water that goes down a drain has somewhere to go, and there is a vertical current that's associated with them. In the ocean, where we have tidal whirlpools, they don't actually have a vertical motion. All the water must stay in the basin and flow out on the surface. That causes a current that doesn't pull things down the drain, unlike what happens in your sink. If you were to have something get caught in a whirlpool current, that object would just go around and around and around.
Dave and Ruth Souza were terrified as their boat was trapped in Old Sow's swirling current without a working engine to get them out. On board was their young niece, Courtney.
And I said, "Don't worry, Courtney. Uncle Dave will get us out of this."
Old Sow was not giving up, but neither were the Souzas. Their escape meant taking extraordinary measures, literally turning this part of their boat trip upside down. The Old Sow whirlpool off the coast of Maine has been a long-time hazard to vessels in these waters. In 2011, Dave and Ruth Souza's boat was trapped in a 30-foot swirl. The spiraling current whipped them around without stopping. Their engine was frozen and unable to power them out.
The boat would not start, so I had to find out what was wrong, so I hung over the back of the boat.
Face down into the middle of the whirlpool.
They grabbed my legs and held me.
What could have happened? Why did the engine suddenly fail?
There was debris caught between the propeller and the motor housing, so dangled over the back of the boat. I stuck my hands into this really cold water and worked to get that piece of debris out of the propeller. And the boat started, and we managed to get out of there. And kids will never forget it.
Neither will I.
The Souzas had reason to be afraid. Although the whirlpool couldn't actually suck them down, if they hadn't been able to restart the engine, Old Sow's turbulence and circulation might have sunk the boat by swamping it with water. But what drives Old Sow's turbulence and circulation? It begins between Canada's Deer Island and Eastport, Maine. A narrow constriction between shorelines accelerates strong tides, creating the whirlpool zone.
Now, there are narrow constrictions all over the world, but they don't all have these whirlpools that form associated with these constrictions.
The mysterious force that turns a narrow inlet into a whirlpool comes from the shape of the landforms under the water. The tide at Old Sow faces a gauntlet of hurdles as it flows inland.
The water is coming through. There's this deep trench and a big mountain that it's got to get around, and another deep trench.
The water flow becomes chaotic, and the water tumbles instead of flowing in nice, flat sheets. That tumbling begins to create the turbulence that we see on the surface that's expressed as whirlpools.
Small whirlpools, just a few feet in size, can crop up in flowing water near canals, dams, or other man-made obstructions. They are often distinctly funnel-shaped.
Whirlpools spin because of centrifugal force. That funnel shape narrows as you go deeper down, and that's because of the pressure that's put on top of it by the water itself. So the deeper that you go, the narrower the funnel will get.
Small whirlpools may seem relatively harmless, but they can pose dangers for whoever gets too close. Jacob Cockle was a young British photographer who captured intriguing videos of whirlpools from both above and below the surface. But in May 2014, unaided by any breathing device, he dove for one last shot of a whirlpool in Cornwall when something went terribly wrong. No one is certain, but after diving underwater, he may have been caught in the circular current and unable to surface. He was pulled out of the water, but could not be revived. Jacob Cockle drowned at the age of 28. Halfway around the world, the massive currents generated by Niagara Falls produce an unusual kind of whirlpool that is arguably the most reliable one on the planet.
Well, this whirlpool is a little bit different from anything else in the world because it keeps going all the time.
A mile downstream from the falls, the fearsome whirlpool rapids flow into the Niagara Whirlpool itself. 1,700 feet long, 1,200 feet wide, and 125 feet deep. It is a stunning example of the danger created when landforms force water to flow along a confined path.
The river flows over a very hard rock layer. It's called the Whirlpool Sandstone. And there's a notch cut into the sandstone, and it creates a jet. And that jet is almost like a fireman's hose. So what it does, it reaches the far bank and then circulates anti-clockwise around. And then, interestingly enough, disappears under the incoming jet and flows out down the gorge.
100,000 cubic feet of water per second flow into the whirlpool to power its relentless rotation. The torrent would take less than 20 minutes to fill Southern California's 100,000-seat Rose Bowl to the top. Late at night and in the winter, however, half of the flow is diverted to generate hydropower. The river bottom has more effect on the slower flow and aims the whirlpool jet at a different angle, actually reversing the flow to create a clockwise rotation. But there's another secret lurking in the Niagara River, which few have ever seen. A mysterious double whirlpool.
It's very interesting. You can see what we call a mushroom effect, where the jet of water is coming into the basin. It's meeting the opposite bank, so water's being forced in and then diverging around, almost creating a double whirlpool. So this is a very interesting hydrodynamic condition.
Like ocean whirlpools, Niagara's can trap anything caught in its monster current. In 1901, Maud Willard entered the Whirlpool Rapids a mile past the falls and rode them successfully with her pet dog. But when she entered the whirlpool, the swirling flow kept her too far from shore for rescuers to retrieve her.
She's there about 4.5 hours. Because the barrel was almost watertight, it's a very small air hole, she suffocates. But a little pet terrier who was with her inside the barrel actually survives.
Where daredevils once fought the currents in barrels, anyone can now ride a 13-ton jet boat to witness the perpetual swirl of the whirlpool up close. Today, the greatest hazard is getting wet. But a jet boat trip is not always a joyride. In 2011, one jet boat crew came to the rescue after Lindsay Burgess was hiking on shore, got too close to the whirlpool, and slipped in.
It feels literally like a tornado underneath the water.
A jet boat happened to be nearby.
I was able to divert the boat immediately to where she was. She was being held by the current.
The boat crew pulled Burgess from the water and revived her. The whirlpool released its victim this time, but it swirls on forever, waiting for the next one. The dangers posed by the collision of land and water also come from forces more subtle than the violent stirrings that generate whirlpools. Planet Earth has 372,000 miles of coastlines. Crowds habitually gather at these places where the sands come face to face with the oceans. And hidden traps routinely take hundreds of lives every year. When the Earth's oceans send waves crashing onto its beaches, the clash between land and water is never more clear. But once the water rushes in, it must find a way to flow out. A chaotic process that produces hidden death traps called rip currents.
I thought, I'm just going to go out and play in the waves. Next thing I knew, it's up to my neck, and then the water's over my head. I'm treading water. I realized pretty quickly I'm in trouble.
In a typical year, there are over 60,000 rescues from drowning reported to the United States Life-Saving Association, performed by lifeguards around the United States. Over 80% are due to people drowning in rip currents.
Rip currents are bands of water that flow away from the beach, often carrying swimmers with them. They compete as killers with tornadoes and hurricanes.
One of the reasons that you don't hear about it as much is those deaths don't occur like they do in a tornado. These typically happen one or two at a time.
Huntington Beach, south of Los Angeles, is famous for the waves crashing in from the Pacific. Its nickname is Surf City. There's a lifeguard tower every 500 feet to protect swimmers. Jamie Ratcliffe, however, was in the water at an unguarded beach when a rip current grabbed hold of him.
I just got in this rhythm of holding my breath, getting knocked down by a wave, swimming back up, taking a breath, yelling for help, waving, but as soon as you wave, you start to sink.
Jamie was unaware there are secrets to recognizing the treacherous rips concealed in the surf. Where is it safe to swim on this beach? In the calm center? Or in the roiling surf at the edges?
If you walked along the beach and you look out at the surf coming in, the calm area is typically where the rip current is. And people tend to be drawn to the calm area because it looks like the safest. And in fact, it's the most hazardous.
The foam of the incoming surf makes everything appear to be flowing toward the shore. But at Sand City Beach in Monterey, California, oceanography students have a colorful technique for bringing the true nature of rip currents into sharp focus.
When you go to the beach, often what you look at are bubbles breaking. And that's what your eye captures. And why we dye the water is it gives us a better understanding of the flow field without getting interrupted by the bubbles that we see from the breaking waves.
You would expect the strong surf to send the dye back to shore. But instead, the rip current captures the colors, which seem to slip under the waves and out to sea. If beaches beneath the incoming surf were uniform, water would flow back to the ocean evenly, never forming rip currents. But beaches under the waves are seldom completely flat.
They're not perfect, they're not smooth, they're irregular, they have dips, they have ridges. The water likes to go in those dips. That causes force of water going back out. So it's basically a river returning back to the sea.
The constant pounding of the waves carves channels into the sand. Once the surf rolls onto the beach, it returns to the ocean, following the path of least resistance, collecting in the channels and accelerating into strong outgoing currents. The swift flow that captured Jamie Ratcliffe swept him into an area of pounding waves.
These waves are so tall and so loud crashing onto the beach. No one can hear me yelling. No one can see me waving. I'm not going to get out of this.
Rip currents typically flow 1 to 2 miles per hour, same as the speed of an average swimmer. But a little known secret makes these death traps even more dangerous.
What people don't realize is that this velocity is going to fluctuate. And as it fluctuates, it can be 0 miles per hour, and then 90 seconds later, it can go all the way up to 5 miles per hour. And this is what catches people off guard.
Now, you would think 5 miles an hour, that's not all that fast. I can run faster than that. But in the water, that's very fast. That's faster than an Olympic swimmer can swim. So if you're trying to swim against that rip current that's moving 5 miles an hour or at that speed, you're going to lose that battle.
People fall victim to rip currents for one primary reason: panic. Breathing accelerates. Swimming efficiency drops. Exhaustion sets in. The swimmer is doomed.
I finally had this realization that I'm not going to make it. This is how I'm going to die.
But the key to survival in these death traps may be more than just facing this overwhelming fear. Scientists have discovered strangely unexpected behavior in rip currents. And knowing how they really act may save a swimmer's life. To follow all of your favorite shows on the Weather Channel, go to facebook.com/Weather Channel Originals. Rip currents are death traps hidden along the planet's beaches everywhere. But they take the most lives by far on the west coast of the United States.
If you go too far and you're in the rip, you can float around. The easiest direction to get out of it today is swimming to the left.
In Monterey, California, scientists are hoping to unravel rip current mysteries by deploying drifters to float out into the surf.
Attached to them are small GPS units that allow us to track their position, and that gives us an idea of where they're moving around in the surf zone.
Data from the drifters can create maps showing how swimmers are carried by rip currents. Maps which have revealed unexpected secrets. Rip currents actually travel in circles.
What we found surprisingly was that the surf zone has these large eddies, and the drifters would go around in these circle patterns, and only now and then would they exit the surf zone.
Lifeguards typically advise swimming parallel to shore to escape a rip current, but these new findings add an extra twist. Often, the current will bring you back on its own in 5 to 7 minutes.
We're recommending that inside the wave breaking, you should relax and float and save your energy. This helps you signal for someone on the beach that they can recognize you.
Saving your energy means floating. In turbulent surf, floating on your back can be awkward and difficult. McMahon advises a slow and steady motion.
The best way to float is to slowly tread water. You'd be surprised that just moving your arms a little bit and kicking you can stay at the surface for a reasonable amount of time with low energy. You don't want to float on your back. You need to actively move your hands and legs.
Jamie Ratcliffe was being pounded by strong waves when he was caught in a rip current. About 100 yards from shore, his efforts to float got him nowhere.
So I fought it a little while longer, but I was just so exhausted. And I thought, I'm just gonna have to get knocked down this time or next time, take a breath underwater and hope that it's quick and painless. And then everything went dark and everything got quiet. And then I realized I could hear mumbled voices. And I felt like I was being carried. And then I felt I was being set down on the warm sand. And they were asking me if I was okay. And I asked them if I was dead. And they said, no, you're okay, you're on the beach. Someone heard you calling for help, and they grabbed a kayak, and they went out to you, and they brought you back. They saved you.
A local newspaper carried a front-page story recounting the dramatic rescue.
There's a photo of me laying on the beach, which was jarring enough to see yourself in that condition on the front page of the paper. But what really got me was the adjacent article of a 16-year-old boy who got caught in that same rip current, and no one saved him. And he wasn't so lucky. And I live with that survivor guilt every day.
This story played out not in California, Florida, or Australia, where rip currents are so common. This one was different.
I was on Lake Michigan, where we had never heard of rip currents. I've been going up there my whole life. There was no sense of danger whatsoever from something like that.
Safety experts urge swimmers to enter the water only where lifeguards can warn and protect against rip currents, the Great Lakes included.
Anywhere there's waves and a sandy beach, there's a potential to generate a rip current. So even though we don't typically think of the lakes as an ocean, they are large bodies of water that the wind can blow over, that generates waves, and these waves will break on a beach and they'll force a rip current system there.
Rip currents are among the most dangerous of the planet's hidden hazards. Together with whirlpools and quicksand, they are products of land converging with water, a union that more often creates life and nurtures it. But in the process, land and water also generate death traps among the most unexpected secrets of the Earth.